Evening, crew. Welcome to the History of Pirates podcast. I'm your host and self-proclaimed pirate captain, Craigbuddy, but you can just call me CB for short. Together we're going to look at the history of pirates, the reasons why they exist and still do, who were they, where did they come from, and when did they show up. It will be more complicated than that, though. What makes someone a pirate and not a privateer? What is a buccaneer? Add to that swashbuckler, freebooter, corsair, filibuster, and we got a lot to cover. To examine only the high water mark of pirates, from the two eras known as the Age of Buccaneers, 1650 to around 1690, and the Golden Age of Pirates, 1690 to around 1730, wouldn't really give us a complete picture. How did it come to such a point where the merchant vessels and the honest trade it carried in the Caribbean came to an almost complete standstill for the English, French, Spanish, and Dutch? And why were the biggest navies in the world with the most advanced state-of-the-art ships not able to catch a few damn dirty pirates floating around in a few small sloops? So first we're going to take some time and examine the earliest pirates. These attacks being recorded by the Egyptians and the Minoans in the Mediterranean, and how they were a thorn in everyone's side for a very long time. And you got to keep in mind that even during these early times, the pirate tribes and the groups had ties to governments and kingdoms, and can sometimes be seen as privateers in a sense. So it's going to get pretty messy pretty quickly. For resources, there are quite a lot of books about pirates in general, along with more detailed accounts of certain pirates like Blackbeard and Black Sam Bellamy. But the grandfather of all these pirate books, when it comes to the Caribbean, is the General History of Pirates. The book was published in London in 1724 under the title, A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates. Now this gives the first open account of the men and women on the high seas who fought against the 18th century elite. We will cover this book in a special episode because it's very unique. The author used an alias for the book, and it's been a goal of historians ever since to sort out the truth from the myths. With its original wording intact and its style as pirate-sounding as could be asked for, it brings the reader closer to the pirate way of life than any time before. And it came with pictures. We'll definitely be using this book as a main resource for a lot of pirate info. However, we need to keep in mind it's not 100% accurate, and the author has a way of romanticizing parts of the trade. But it does depict a lot of very real, very mean people doing a lot of bad things with swords and cannons, as well as smart and cunning people doing very smart and sneaky things too. Pirates have always been seen as enemies of all mankind, since by definition they would attack and plunder from any and all nations, and were limited not by seas or oceans, borders, or treaties. So for that reason, we will cover pirates from all over the world, and over time notice the similarities between the pirates of different times and the different places. For example, we will cover the Chinese and Japanese pirates who preyed on the ships along the coast, way before the Europeans even knew what the coastlines and the waters of the Far East even looked like. We'll take a look at modern piracy as well, which grew after the end of World War II, since most of the navies at the time were shrinking and not expanding their forces. Pirates have always been known to thrive in areas where no central government exists, like areas of modern-day Somalia. With the advent of the modern technologies, such as the automatic weapons, RPGs, faster boats, GPS, it's giving modern pirates the ability to track and capture ships much, much easier than ever before. Most of the time they end up turning around and ransoming the company or the group's ship back to them, and making a tidy profit. Piracy is long from over. Now, like I said earlier, I'm Craigbuddy. I'm not a historian, I'm not a teacher, I'm just a pirate fan. And I've been fascinated by the stories and legends surrounding pirates ever since I heard about them. Keep this in mind if and when I pronounce a French, Spanish, and most likely English words wrong. Let me know so I can correct it, or yell at me for it. Either option works for me. You can do that at thehistoryofpiratespodcast.com. Ever since I was a kid, my favorite pirate era has always been the Golden Age of Pirates, and the fight for the pirate kingdom they wanted so badly. They trusted and followed their own pirate code. They held everyone accountable, and giving a one vote, one person to everybody on the crew was commonplace among pirate ships. Votes were taken, and only during battle did the captain have a final say. If they were attacking a ship, or if they were running away from a ship, the captain is the law. His word is everything. But the moment the event is over, the crisis is past. He loses that power, and it goes right back to the decisions and the votes. They would write out what's called the ship's articles before a voyage. These were rules and regulations which were agreed by all the crew, captain included. Now, it is true that some pirate captains would create their own articles, and anyone joining them would be known as going on the account. One of the funniest rules I've read so far on ship's articles was,
"Thou shalt not pisseth on the deck."
which sounds funny, but made a lot of sense, since they were all sleeping below the deck. Anyone caught doing this was beaten, left on an island, or even killed. This pirate way of life is seen by many to be one of, if not the first, true democratic groups, representing everyone equally, without race, gender, age, or religion being a factor. And it's a huge reason why I've always loved the idea of pirate freedom. This love of pirate freedom and my fondness for history podcasts led me to want to create one. And hopefully this podcast will allow us to go on our very own adventures as a crew. We'll travel to the Caribbean and the Mediterranean, the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts, from Newfoundland to Florida, to the shores of Japan and China, to Africa, Madagascar, and anywhere else we can find pirate hotspots and lairs. We'll meet such legendary people as Blackbeard, Charles Vane, Captain Kidd, Henry Morgan, and Francis Drake. Some were seen as pirates and others as privateers. Some were seen as heroes and some as villains. A favorite of mine is Captain Howell Davis, who was one of the most cunning pirates alive. Along with Blackbeard and his smoking beard, Davis was one of the smartest for his psychological warfare. But there are far more pirates to look at than those chosen famous few. We'll meet pirate figures like Angria, a famous Indian pirate who terrorized the East India Company's ships in the Arabian Sea, and Chinese pirate Cheng Chi Leung, aka Gaspar Nicholas, whose fleet was so massive it was able to get the Dutch to pay a tribute since it had stopped all commercial trade and navigation. We'll even meet kid pirates. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Children, pirates. Now, most of them became pirates as young as 9, and most of the time willingly. A young boy, John King, aged 11, joined Black Sam Bellamy's crew on the Whydah, which was a state-of-the-art slave ship which was captured and turned into a pirate ship. And he worked on it until it sank on April 26, 1717, around midnight. The Whydah pirate ship is the only confirmed pirate shipwreck found, and there is even a museum called the Whydah Pirate Museum in Provincetown, Massachusetts. They have a website at whydah.com if you wanted to check it out. And it's whydah.com. Among the Whydah's artifacts recovered by the underwater explorer Barry Clifford was a small black leather shoe, and together with a silk stocking and a fibula bone, it was determined to be that of a child between 8 to 11. So you can probably assume who we're talking about here. The young John King. A brave pirate until the end. We will definitely be covering the Whydah's life and its ultimate destruction when it's wrecked along the coast in a storm. I've discussed ideas with other podcasters, and I've thought of different concepts. I've decided to cover the history of pirates chronologically, but since ancient sources aren't as plentiful as the later accounts, we will get to cover those later pirates in more detail. I'm going to use a numbering system where I can add extra episodes when an interesting subtopic comes up. It'll give me the ability to cover it and keep the podcast flowing forward. I'm also going to play with a few other ideas, covering topics chosen by you, the crew. Now, you can let me know this by going to the History of Pirates podcast Facebook page, or do a search for the crew of the History of Pirates podcast discussion group. I'm also going to try to get special guests on, such as authors, other podcasters, or crew members, like yourself, who want to come and discuss pirate topics from certain perspectives. Now, at first, the podcast will be pretty fluid. It'll be weekly or bi-weekly. We're going to cover all the topics we can, with as much detail as we can. So that's it. Next episode, we'll start to cover the basics. What is a pirate? Until then, I'll see you next time, crew.